What do you think, Minister? Do you think it was correct?
Well, it's not for me to say.
You're a minister.
Well, it's not for me to say.
You have an opinion.
It's not for me to say.
You have no opinion.
What assessment have you made as to the extent to which Wagner is helping circumvent and evade sanctions that have been put in place by HMG?
I've got no specific knowledge of that. Ben, do you want to comment? No.
I don't have any evidence of that.
No knowledge of it. Does that mean because we haven't asked the question, because we're not tracking it, or because we genuinely have had no evidence of issues yet?
I don't specifically know about that. I'm sure that the department is tracking that, but I don't have any particular knowledge of it.
The Treasury issued waivers to sanctions
Yes.
that allowed Prigozhin to fly his lawyers to St. Petersburg to perfect a case to sue Elliot Higgins in an English court because Elliot Higgins had revealed Prigozhin's role at the head of the Wagner Group, and Prigozhin wanted to undermine that story because he felt that story had led to sanctions being imposed.
Yeah.
Do you want to just take this opportunity to apologise to Mr. Higgins for Her Majesty's government having issued that sanctions waiver?
The Treasury ministers are considering this approach and considering whether or not change is possible.
Do you want to take this as an opportunity to apologise to Mr. Higgins?
Well, I don't think it's useful for me to comment on the specific case. I think it's useful for me to make a comment about our general approach, which I've done.
How do you think officials and ministers ended up on such different pages about what waivers should be issued to which Russian warlords?
I think, having not been involved in those decisions, it would be speculation for me to answer that. So I don't think that would be very useful.
What do you kind of think went wrong here?
Well, I think that's I couldn't usefully comment.
Now, Mr. Prigozhin's lawyers sent emails saying that their intention was to undermine Elliot Higgins and Bellingcat because they saw his reporting as responsible for the sanctions implemented on him. So here was a legal action that was deliberately aimed at undermining the sanctions that the Treasury had recommended.
Yeah.
So there was no general right to use the English legal system as a legal weapon against Elliot Higgins. So I'm not quite sure what is the constitutional position that needs revising.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. I think that will be taken into account when the Treasury review this.
Do you recognise that the Convention on the Right of Legal Representation is not an unfettered?
Of course I recognise that, yeah. Of course I recognise that.
Constraints. Because there are constraints, someone has to make a judgment.
I recognise that, yes.
And that judgment, in this case we are told, was a civil servant, although we are yet to learn as to whether it went to a special advisor in the department. And we still don't know whether a Treasury minister actually signed it.
I mean, that's exactly correct. And I think the consideration is on whether or not that judgment was correct. That will be the specific focus of the consideration. So you've correctly characterised that.
What do you think, Minister? Do you think it was correct?
Well, it's not for me to say.
You're a minister.
Well, it's not for me to say.
You have an opinion.
It's not for me to say.
You have no opinion. Okay.
I think what I will say before we move on to Saqib is that we as a committee are aghast at the treatment of Elliot Higgins, and that we would want to put on our record that we would never want to see such shameful practices again. And I, as a former civil servant, because politicians are often attacked for criticising civil servants, am frankly appalled that any civil servant of any grade would see that name and not think it had to go to a special advisor at minimum, if not a minister. So I do think there are many more questions that this committee will want to follow. But I think we would like to make that very clear. Saqib, please.